We just have to.
Australia has long been seen as one of the world's most successful multicultural stories, a country built almost entirely through immigration, where people from hundreds of different countries have been able to immigrate and build something really special together. But beneath that image, tensions have always existed. Today's debates surrounding immigration, multiculturalism, national identity have become more heated than it has in decades. And this isn't just in Australia. All across the world, right-wing political movements have surged in popularity in the past few years. In Australia specifically, we've seen the surge and almost monstrous growth in popularity from the party One Nation, backed by Pauline Hanson, and similar groups and parties have also popped up in Britain, Germany, and France. But what if I told you this surge in popularity was almost minuscule in its importance compared to the boiling point that Australia was privy to almost or just over 20 years ago. 20 years ago, these same tensions actually boiled over into being one of the most controversial days in modern Australian history. On the 11th of December 2005, thousands of people all gathered on the beaches of Cronulla. What initially began as a rally in some sort of support of local surf lifesavers quickly descended into something far more sinister. Crowds wrapped around in Australian flags and holding posts that carried Australian flags quickly started targeting anyone that they believed looked Middle Eastern. People were beaten in broad daylight, cars were smashed, buildings and businesses were burnt down, and within a quick few hours, Sydney became a boiling point and a cesspit for some of the most rampant racial violence Australia had experienced in decades. Following nights brought revenge attacks and smaller spot fires of violence across several surrounding suburbs, with many people believing that this was not the end of the ensuing violence. To understand how Australia reached this point, though, we have to go back several years before one single punch was even thrown in Cronulla. This is because the racial tensions and the violence did not happen in isolation. Violence was a result of years of growing fear, violent crimes, media sensationalism, and growing distrust between many of the communities that lived in Sydney. By the early 2000s, Sydney was changing rapidly. Australia's largest city had become one of the most multicultural places in the entire world. Communities from Europe, the Middle East, Asia, and Africa had all been moving into the suburbs for a few decades now, transforming it in different ways and bringing different cultures, religions, and practices. For millions of Australians, multiculturalism was always something that should have been celebrated. Certain suburbs experienced growing tensions between specific communities, particularly amongst groups of young people. Police were increasingly responding to ethnically motivated assaults, racial violence, and territorial disputes. At the same time as this, media coverage surrounding violent crimes that had been performed by people with migrant backgrounds had began gaining massive attention in the Australian public. Many Australians came to believe that the Australian government and police were losing control of this problem. There was a growing perception that the courts, the police, and the governance were all either not caring enough or just completely losing control of this growing increase in migrant crime.
There is no getting away from the fact that these gangs are of Middle Eastern appearance. They're Lebanese kids.
That perception, rightly or wrongly, is what ultimately led to the events of 2005. And one word specifically can be linked to the mind state of what was seen as ethnic Australians towards these migrants, and that word was WOG. Historically, the term had been used as a term of degradation against communities that had migrated to Australia from the Middle East, Persian communities, and wider Arab communities. Unlike many racial slurs, it actually wasn't directed specifically at one ethnic group. Instead, it was used as more of a broad term directed at anyone that I guess looked different to the Australian public. I'm actually quite familiar with this word because I've been told by many of my older family members that were alive during the time that this word was used against them pretty frequently in a derogatory manner. While many younger Australians like me now use the word as more of a comedic or satirical way of making fun of the mind state of Australia at the time, not taking it as seriously as maybe something like the N-word or some homophobic slurs. Back then in the late 90s, early 2000s, it was a seriously hurtful and violent word that did drive even more the growing separation between different communities in Australia and more specifically Sydney. Over the next few years though, a list of very specific violent crimes that did occur in Sydney only deepened the wounds of tension. Each incident further intensified the public's fury against the Australian police, government and migrant population, which eventually boiled over into the events that took place in Cronulla. The first major event occurred several years before the Cronulla Riots. On the evening of the 17th of October 1998, 14-year-old Edward Lee, a Year 9 student at Canterbury Boys High School, was walking with 4 friends to attend a 15th birthday party on Telopia Street in Punchbowl. The group had accidentally approached the wrong house where a large group of other youths were surrounding. An altercation quickly erupted. During the street brawl, Edward was stabbed twice, puncturing his heart and his lung. He managed to drag himself into his car with his friend attempting to drive off, but the rival youth group, who was also happened to later be known as a gang, started shooting at the vehicle, shattering the rearview mirror. Edward was rushed to Canterbury Hospital and later pronounced dead that same night. The violence stemming from this incident didn't just end with the incident on the night though. 2 witnesses in the case were later ambushed in their car with their 2-year-old child. Gunmen fired 6 shots into the vehicle in an attempt to silence the witnesses, injuring one with a bullet to the neck and killing the other. There was also growing religious tension between the Christian youth and the Islamic youth in Sydney. The geographical overlap between Lebanese Christians and Lebanese Muslims in southwest Sydney had led to growing turf, territorial, and retaliatory violence. New South Wales police intelligence recorded in the early 2000s that there was growing numbers of reports of young Christian men and women being targeted, harassed, and assaulted for wearing visible crucifixes around their neck. Drive-by altercations and machete brawls started popping up around Bankstown where specific territorial lines were drawn. The growing tension and fear of Islam on Australian soil was not just because of actions on Australian soil though. On the 12th of October 2002, Islamic terrorist attacks took place in the tourist district of Kuta on the Indonesian island of Bali, a popular destination for Australian tourists. The bombings killed 202 people, including 88 Australians, and injured a further 209. It was the worst terrorist attack in Indonesia's history. A week later, an audio cassette was discovered purportedly from Osama bin Laden, where the intentions behind the attacks were stated, and those intentions were to target Australian civilians in a retaliatory manner due to Australia's supporting of America in America's war on terror in the Middle East. Perhaps the most sickening and the most important events that took place in Sydney and around Australia leading up to the Cronulla Riots were the sickening and disgusting gang rapes that took place in the early 2000s around Sydney.
It was the middle of the afternoon, a working day, in the middle of Australia's largest city. An 18-year-old girl has just been for a job interview. She gets off the suburban train with some Lebanese Australian men whom she has just met. And so begins a horror journey into night. It only ends when she has been sexually assaulted by 14 men and raped 25 times. What Amanda doesn't know during her night of terror is that she is just the latest in a series of gang rapes with ugly racial overtones.
A group of gang rapes perpetrated and organised by youths of Pakistani and Lebanese descent. The Ashfield gang rapes involved a series of attacks that took place over 6 months in 2002. This included the rape and molestation of at least 9 girls aged as young as 13. Along with the rapes, the victims were also kidnapped, beaten, robbed, and held at knife point by the attackers. 4 Pakistani brothers and a Nepali student were convicted.
8 of Amanda's 14 rapists were charged and convicted. All of them are Lebanese Australians.
On a couple of occasions, she would pretend to do a grotty spit, you know, that sort of thing. And even referred to the girls as we were getting them through to court past her as shamuta, which is, as I understand it, Arabic for slut.
One of the rapists actually argued in court that his actions were due to alcohol and cultural conditioning, now apologising to the victim, saying he now understood Australian culture. This came to the disgust of the victim's father, who himself happened to be a Muslim migrant. Victims publicly called for the perpetrators to be deported back to Pakistan. The other Sydney gang rapes were another group of attacks committed by a group of up to 14 men on women and girls as young as 14. These crimes are actually described as ethnically motivated hate crimes.
If she'd been a Muslim, no, they wouldn't have touched her. She was wearing a burqa or a hijab or whatever, they wouldn't have touched her. It's only because she was a non-Muslim, they thought that she was easy. They don't care. She's only an Aussie anyway, so it doesn't matter to them.
The attackers used SMS and mobile phones to coordinate the attacks. During sentencing, Judge Michael Finane described the rapes as events that you hear about or read about only in the context of wartime atrocities. They sent violent anti-Christian messages, such as sending texts that said, "When you're feeling down, bash a Christian or bash a Catholic." Victims reported being called an Aussie pig and being asked if Leb cock tastes better than Aussie cock. They were also told that they were going to be raped Leb style and that they deserved it because they were an Australian.
But clearly what happened to you, there were racist overtones to what they did and said to you.
There was plenty of them. Lots. I was, quote, an Aussie pig.
An Aussie pig.
Something. You know, it was really a hard thing to hear because I'm proud of being Australian. I thought everyone was. And these people were making out that I was some sort of a lesser being. And it's just horrible.
Is it true that first question, almost the first question they asked you when they came on the train, was, "Are you Australian?"
Yes, it's true. They asked me what my nationality was.
Australian Conservative commentator Miranda Devine accused the media of attempting to airbrush the racial element out of the reporting. By the time Australia entered 2005, these events had become a combination of fear, distrust, and anger in the Australian public. To many Australians, these events represented a failure by the police, the justice system, and the courts and politicians. To others, the growing focus on ethnicity behind the crimes started to cause a unfair malignment of entire communities for the actions of a few members of that community. And in Sydney, nowhere represented the growing tensions more than the beaches of Cronulla. Just after 3 p.m. on Sunday, the 4th of December 2005, police were called reporting an incident of an assault on 2 off-duty male surf lifesavers at the hands of a group of 8 men. A verbal exchange had taken place after 3 of the off-duty lifeguards had approached the group of Lebanese men. Both groups accused the other group of starting the incident. One of the Lebanese men reportedly said to one of the lifeguards, "I'm allowed to stare, now fuck off and leave my beach." One of the lifesavers responded saying, "I come down here on my spare time to save you dumb cunts from drowning." This exchange later escalated into a fight where one of the lifesavers badly injured himself, falling and striking his head on the concrete.
A major police hunt is underway for a cowardly group of up to 20 men who attacked 2 surf lifesavers at Cronulla. Both young men had to be treated in hospital for severe cuts and bruising.
For many, this was not just a brutal crime, but an act of sacrilege. Young volunteer surf lifesavers bashed while giving up their weekend to help others.
How the thing was broken up, I don't know.
Sydney Radio 2GB on Monday morning.
Bruising. Bill, hello?
Alan, I just saw some snippets on News Channel 9 of the horrendous bashing, or if you like, gang attack on the beach at Cronulla yesterday. I mean, what type of grubs do we have in this?
What kind of grubs? Well, I tell you what kind of grubs. This lot were Middle Eastern grubs.
There we go.
And you're not allowed to say it, but I'm saying it.
Well,
Media reports noted pre-existing tensions, with women noting that they had previously, almost on a daily basis, been sexually harassed on the same beach by Lebanese men.
Like if they come up to you and ask you, for example, if you're rude, and they all laugh, they think it's all funny that their friends are doing that, and as soon as you say no, you get called a slut, you know, you get called a bitch, anything pretty much.
I have asked on many occasions why they do it. All the answers I ever get is because we hate you because you're Australian, because you're white, because you're not Muslim. I never get a straight answer. So I think it's pretty much religious and culture based.
They come down here and they start with their mouth and they just bullshit everybody. They harass our women. It's their religion.
Well, basically, if you come to the beach and you yell at people from a distance,
abuse and you don't know the people and they don't deserve it.
Yeah, then how can you demand respect? That's just rude.
Us girls, we're just over it.
We don't really support what did happen here that Sunday, but it sort of needed to happen eventually just to bring it to everyone's attention.
Then came December the 11th. Over the course of the Sunday, almost 5,000 people gathered around North Cronulla Beach.
You're standing on the soil that has been fought for by Australian Anzac diggers. This is what our grandfathers fought for, to protect this so we can enjoy it. And we don't need these Lebanese or Lebanese to take it away from us. You're not welcome. This is our land. Get the hell out.
Early in the morning, people began with partying and barbecuing. But at 12:59, a young man of Middle Eastern appearance appeared on the beach. The crowd began chanting and rushed him. They dragged him out of a pub and attacked him until the police interfered. An hour later, 2 Bangladeshi boys were surrounded, had bottles thrown at them, and the crowd chanted, "Fuck off, Lebs." And their cars were smashed as they tried to leave the beach. Chants such as "Fuck off Lebs," "We grew here, you flew here," "Aussie pride," and "Fuck off Wogs" started spreading throughout the beach as the day went on. Rumours started spreading and more people began to arrive by train. At around 3 p.m, 2 young men of Middle Eastern appearance arrived at Cronulla station. The mob entered the train carriage and began assaulting the 2 men. Multiple other assaults occurred during the afternoon, with multiple incidents of the mob attacking, throwing beer bottles, and throwing sausages at people. What began as spot fires of beach fire confrontations began to spread to coordinated attacks around surrounding Sydney suburbs. There was also violent retaliation from the WOG or ethnic groups in Sydney at the time. That evening, around 100 locals from Punchbowl gathered at Punchbowl Park. They formed a convoy of around 40 cars and all began to drive towards the beaches to seek revenge. Convoy, armed with knives, machetes, guns, and bats, assaulted people, damaged up to 100 cars, and began to clash with police that were decked out in riot gear.
I was walking back from the 7-Eleven, just gone to get a can of drink. I heard some yelling and screaming across the road. I looked across. There was some 3 or 4 young guys trying to drag a guy out of the vehicle. Luckily, the guy in the vehicle managed to drive off. Thought I'm just going to get out of here, get into my vehicle, get out of the area. Next thing I know, some guy had run across from me. I heard running and like a screaming. I turned up. That's the first guy that throws the beer bottle at me. I backed into this alcove here, and next thing I know, there's 20-30 guys hitting me.
26-year-old mechanic Dan Gray was stabbed 3 times in the back outside of a golf club. His attackers shouted, "Get the Aussie dogs, get the Aussie sluts," as they stabbed him, narrowly missing his spine and his lungs. Additional smaller riots broke out over the following nights. On the 12th of December, rioters left messages such as "Aussie die," "Intifada, it's war," and "Aussie die, soldiers rise," as they continued to burn down shops, assault locals, and destroy businesses. Around 2,000 people gathered at Lakemba Mosque, some armed with Glock pistols that were displayed to the media. The Uniting Church in Auburn was burned to the ground, with many of the people attending Christmas carols at the time being threatened and assaulted. In the aftermaths of the riots, the police formed Strike Force Inaugura to investigate the violence. It started as a relatively small team of just 28 officers led by Superintendent Dennis Bray. By late January 2006, the investigation expanded greatly, with now almost 100 officers on the case. However, things quickly became messy at the top of the investigation. During a radio interview, New South Wales Police Commissioner Ken Moroney insisted that the police had no footage of the retaliatory attacks that took place on December 11th. But it soon emerged that the officers had actually possessed the footage for over 5 weeks. This revelation forced Moroney to sack Superintendent Bray. Despite the internal turmoil, the investigation pressed on. By July 2006, Strike Force Inaugura had laid out 285 charges on 104 individuals. Of those 104, 51 of them were from the initial Cronulla Riots attacks, and 53 of them were from the retaliatory attacks over the next several days. With how divisive Australian politics are today and the seemingly increasing divisiveness in Australia, it is always important to remember that it has been worse and it always could get worse. The idea that these events such as the Cronulla Riots or the ensuing retaliatory riots have to be shunned or forgotten about or kept to a 5-minute news piece every 20 years on a current affair is ridiculous. And in my opinion, the only reason we have that mind state about these attacks is because the Australian government is still ashamed of its failure on behalf of not only the local Australians in not being able to cap migrant crime at the time, but also on the migrant community as not being able to step in and stop the racist violence against them at the time in Cronulla. To this day, the Cronulla Riots remain one of the most important and relevant events in recent Australian political history.
I mean, you know, people are entitled to their sexual proclivities, you know. I mean, let there be 1,000 blossoms bloom as far as I'm concerned, you know. But I ain't spending any time on it because in the meantime, every 3 months, a person is torn to pieces by a crocodile in North Queensland.